Hello, welcome to the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. This is episode 101. Today, you're going to get to hear from Kealey Wohlgemuth, who is a third-year Ph.D. student at Texas Tech University under the supervision of Dr. Jacob Mota. Dr. Mota was on a previous podcast episode, so I'll make sure and link his episode in the show notes. But Kealey is a CSCS, and she is a certified sports nutritionist through the ISSN, and she does research including neuromuscular performance, skeletal muscle imaging, and resistance training within special populations, including tactical athletes. Kealey and Jacob and I talked a lot about their most recent research. I know you're going to love this episode. Please give us a rating and follow the podcast on whatever platform you listen. Have a great day. Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. Right? Listeners, how exciting is this? I'm retired. Well, technically, we're recording the day before I retire, but by the time you get to listen, I'm retired. So let's just give a moment of silence. Okay, that's enough. I am super excited today. I am here with two friends. We have Kealey Wohlgemuth. How'd I do, Kealey?
Good.
I did it. I had to write it out phonetically. And her badass advisor, Dr. Jake Mota, which you can listen to a previous episode with Dr. Jake. I will link it in the show notes. Welcome to the show, both of you. How are you doing today? Kealey, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here. How are you?
Oh my God. As we spoke about before I got on the call, I have really bad senioritis. And I didn't read the paper that I was supposed to read, but we're going to get through it because you're amazing. And then Dr. Jacob Mota, how are you today?
Outstanding. Happy to be here.
How does it feel to be a repeat guest?
Fantastic. I now understand what it's like to be, on Joe Rogan.
Right. Well, you're amongst a very small, and very distinct echelon of people. Dr. Andrew Jacob, couple of appearances. Megan Lautz, 50 or 60 appearances. I've lost count. Just kidding. I think she's been on 4 times. And now you for a second appearance. Pretty exciting. All right. Well, since we already met you, and I'm going to link that in the show notes, I'm going to focus on Queen Kealey right now and sort of get to know her. So I'm going to ask you a really hard question. Who is Kealey Wohlgemuth?
Oh, geez. Starting right off the guns here. I guess right now I'm a PhD candidate from my 3rd year of my PhD at Texas Tech University. Just a lab mentor, I guess, full of other women that I'm helping mentor and get involved in research. Working with Dr. Mota for a few years. So pretty much just, in the world of research, trying to mentor others, especially young women in the world of research.
I love that, and I already have a side question. So I was lucky enough to get to hang out with y'all in your lab last summer in Las Vegas. Hate Las Vegas, but don't hate you guys. Love you guys, and shout out to Katie Hirsch for kind of putting that little meetup together. But I did notice that the lab people call you Dad. Tell me more. Why do they call you Dad?
I don't honestly know how it started, but I think it's because I try to just make jokes and keep the lab lighthearted, and apparently all of my jokes are dad jokes. And then if they come to me for problems, I can try to fix them. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I think that's basically it, just having fun in the lab, and apparently that's not the title mom, it's more the title dad, just having fun, being the fun parent to a bunch of people, so.
Do they call you on weekends and be like, my bathtub's clogged up, Dad, can you help me? Or is that not really your role?
No, not really. It's more like there's something wrong with the ultrasound or the dynamometer.
The lab version, close enough.
Yeah. For
if
sure.
our lab had a drain, then maybe they'd call me.
Oh my God, you guys, I'm dying already. Okay, Kealey, what sets your soul on fire?
I think what sets my soul on fire is just helping others learn. So if that's like teaching in the classroom or in the lab, coaching, like having previous experience in a weight room, coaching individuals, but just watching people learn and being able to teach them new things and have them really pick it up is probably what's the most, I guess, or the coolest thing about this job and what I've done so far.
Unknowingly, girl, you just roped yourself into a mentorship because I'm going to need some real help. I'm starting a PhD really soon, and I'm just going to need some real help. So I need to get your digits on speed dial. Is that okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Okay. And the last one, how are you changing the world?
I think just trying to educate like individuals, especially people, first responders, tactical populations about health, wellness, and performance and kind of what that looks like for them, for different people, different ages. Like we might talk about this ranks paper, but just trying to get information out to people who might not see it otherwise.
Love it, love it, love it. And I just heard something. I talk myself a lot about the difference between health. You didn't say fitness, but I'll add fitness. Health, fitness, wellness, and performance. And I think that they're all very different. But from your perspective, can you break that down a little bit? Health, wellness, and performance. What does that mean to you?
To me, I think health is some of those like traditional biomarkers, more of that scientific world. If it's looking at like lipid profiles, for wellness, I think that's more of kind of the whole approach of like emotional, maybe mental health, particularly with like fire. We talk about sleep habits, which I don't think maybe that fits as much as some of that science based, like the biomarkers or blood panels. And then for performance, that's particularly looking at like muscle strength, muscular endurance, and some of those variables that we use in our lab.
I think I'm going to give myself an A because that's kind of how I explain it too. So I'm going to mop my brow and go, okay, I'm doing a good job. Lady, I want to know how there's always a story. There's always a backstory. How did you become interested? Okay, I'll ask the question two different ways and you just answer it, whatever resonates with you. But either how did you become interested in working with Dr. Mota, or what made you interested in first responders in the first place? Because I'm going to tell you, we're kind of a pain in the ass. So if you haven't figured that out yet, I'm telling you right now, we're a pain in the ass. But how did you get where you are today?
So it's kind of a long story, I guess, but to start at the beginning, so I do have family members that are in the fire service. So my cousin back home is a fire chief, so I've just kind of been around the fire service as a whole, other family members in the military, so just kind of being around tactical populations growing up. And then when I was in undergrad at UNC Chapel Hill, I was involved in strength and conditioning. I knew I wanted to pursue a master's degree and do more of like the research side of strength and conditioning. And that's where I found Dr. Eric Ryan in his lab, where Dr. Mota was a PhD student at the time. So I just kind of could mesh both of my passions for like the first responder population and strength and conditioning in the research world with Dr. Ryan's group, which brought me to Dr. Mota. And then just wanted to pursue research even further after the master's degree. And then here I am now, third year of the PhD with Dr. Mota.
Okay, first off, I did not know that pathway. That is super cool. And also, it just reinforces the whole, like, you know, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon? It's the 6 degrees of Abby Smith Ryan, okay? Everything goes directly back to Abby somehow, I think. Just saying. So now I know how you got where you are, why you're interested. Can you start telling me a little bit about your research? And because I am an old, I almost said old guy. I'm not an old guy because I'm an old firefighter. I am super interested in the paper that came out recently where you were the first author, raise the roof, about how older firefighters although they're less fit, they can sometimes still perform pretty well on job test stuff. The mic is yours. Let's hear about that project.
Yeah, so this was a collaboration with a few people with the Travis County Emergency Department, Vanessa there, who you're familiar with, and then
Love her.
So we were fortunate enough to work together to try to look at different ranks of first responders. So looking at recruits, looking at incumbent officers or firefighters, and then officers. There's 160, I think, that participated in that study. So really just looking at retrospective data or looking back at their data from their physical examinations and trying to break down differences based off that recruit versus incumbent versus the officer. Being that most recruits are probably younger, and then the officers being kind of that older age range. So what we found for that was the body comp, and where we looked at body comp, and then cardiovascular fitness, or from a cardiopulmonary exercise test that they did, and then air consumption test completion time. So we did see what people probably would imagine, some differences between the ranks, particularly with recruits and the officers in that study. So with recruits, they had better body composition than incumbents, but it was not different than the officers in this sample. So recruits had lower body mass index and body fat percentage compared to the officers, but was not significantly different in some of those populations or those groups. So interesting data. What you might think about body fat percentage and VO2 max, probably better in the younger individuals. And then kind of highlighting that as you age, particularly in some of these tactical populations, maybe you should look into some of these fitness variables. How are they still performing across the rank or time in the fire service?
So what I was really interested in is, like, we're older, we're fatter, we're less fit, all of the things, but yet we seem to hold our own on some of those job tasks. Can you tell the listeners, like, what in the actual hell? How does that happen? The old fat people do okay. How did it happen?
I think you're still training. Hopefully you're still, some people maybe not, but still training, still years of experience that maybe some of the recruits don't have. They might have some of the better kind of performance variables, but maybe they don't have all the skills or experience of the officers.
So I have a theory, but I want to hear Dr. Mota's theory first, because mine is actually just a joke. Go ahead, Dr. Mota.
Yeah, so it's a complicated question, right? How are the characteristics of the senior personnel's worse? And all kind of roads make it believe that these senior personnel shouldn't be performing too well, yet they're performing at least on par with the younger personnel and the recruits. I think Kealey's right. There's definitely going to be some movement efficiency that goes along, right? If you've been doing the exact same thing for 15 years, well, guess what? You get pretty good at it. You don't necessarily have to have a high aerobic capacity, a high muscular strength, or a low percentage of body fat in order to be good at doing your job. But emphasis on the but. The scary part here is that the older firefighters have the worse health characteristics. And since they have the worst health characteristics, particularly probably the two bigger ones are going to be the higher percent body fat and the lower aerobic capacity. It doesn't mean that they can't do the same job, but it makes their engines work quite a bit harder, right? You can have a V6 pickup truck pull a trailer, but maybe it's not going to be as efficient as a V8 pickup truck pulling a trailer, right? And getting my West Texas examples out for you and all your listeners. You can do it, but doesn't make it right and doesn't make it good. You're performing these tasks at a very high level, at a very high percentage of your aerobic capacity, which places the body at greater physiological risk for something bad happening, like a cardiac event. And that's the thing that we kind of look at and get a little bit nervous of, saying, man, yeah, you can do the same job, but on your body, it wears you down substantially more.
I like to say every firefighter will always get the job done. They will, but at what cost physiologically to their body? But here's my answer to the question about old people. Now, you probably may or may not have seen the movie Fried Green Tomatoes with Kathy Bates. And she's in her little car, and these like hot young teenagers are driving some sports car, and they're just being assholes to her in the parking lot. And so she just backs the hell into them and just smashes their car. And she's like, I'm older and I have better insurance. So this is what I'm thinking. Like, we're older and we're just smarter. We get the job done. So I want to stay for a second. I've talked about this on the podcast with various guests about Katie Hirsch was one of them, another Ryan Lab prodigy. But we talked a lot about VO2 max, and I don't think it ever hurts to remind the listeners what does VO2 max mean? Why do we even care? I just take that wherever you'd like to take it, but impress upon the listeners how important that is for them, whichever one of you want to take that. Don't fight. Nobody talk at the same time.
So VO2 max is what I refer to as aerobic capacity. It stands for the volume of oxygen, and it's specifically the volume of oxygen that your body can take in. So how many and what kind of airflow you can breathe in per breath, and then how much of that oxygen that you can convert to energy. And energy is exactly how your brain probably thinks of it, as the form of the capacity to perform work, right? So we convert the oxygen that we breathe into fuel for our muscles in our bodies. And there's a number of pathways getting into the weeds of it, but that's essentially what VO2 max is. The higher your VO2 max, the greater capacity for aerobic work that you have.
I like it, but I also want you to talk about what things can positively impact our VO2 max. So you said it's the capacity to get the oxygen into the body, but also efficiently use it. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but what various things could we do to impact that VO2 max?
Sure. There's a couple different components of VO2 max. Of course, there's how much air you can breathe in, and there's not much you're going to be able to change about that. There's how much oxygen that you're able to pull out of your lungs, and then again, there's not too much you can directly do about that. But how much oxygen that you're able to transport through your vessels into your muscles is perhaps where our world comes into play. There's a lot that we can do physiologically to improve your VO2 max. You can improve, of course, from the cardiovascular side of things. So you can improve your cardiac output, which is the Q, right? So how much blood you're moving per beat over time. And then there's how much oxygen you're pulling out of the bloodstream from that point at the level of the muscle. There's this weird dance of you want to increase your Q, you want to increase your cardiac output, but you can only have so much of an increase. And that Q helps a little bit from the math side, but you got to rely the rest on how well you're pulling out oxygen at the level of the muscle. And from a firefighting standpoint, you use your aerobic capacity for the job all the time. The NFPA, and there's a couple different resources out there that make some recommendations for what VO2 max should be. So the NFPA wants you to have a VO2 max of about 42 milliliters per kilogram body mass per minute. There's other citations out there, there's other references out there that suggest that the minimum VO2 max required to perform firefighter activities is about 38 mils per. Those aren't particularly high numbers. 42 mils per is definitely obtainable for most men and women under the age of, say, 50, 60. That's definitely obtainable. But you have to train for it. You've got to do it. The scary part is, from our world, is the average VO2 max that we saw for the firefighters and officers in the study we're just talking about is about 34 mils per. So 34 mils per is the average aerobic capacity of an average firefighter in our sample. Yet the NFPA requires you to have, or recommends you to have, 42 mils per. In our study here, we reported that recruits were much better than your line firefighter or your officer at 40 mils per. Unfortunately, that's still below what the NFPA recommends. So there's a little bit of room for growth.
I would agree. And Kealey, I'm bouncing this back to you because you were the lead author on this, but I know that Vanessa, and I'll link Vanessa in the show notes. She was on a previous episode. I know Vanessa has several different measures that she does throughout the year, and I don't remember, and this is where you're going to have to remind me, is the VO2 max test that Pflugerville does, is that an estimation or is it an actual, they're hooked up to everything and getting a super accurate measure? Tell me more.
Theirs was a super accurate measure. So they were hooked up to a Met car or metabolic cart. It was a graded cycle-based test. So on like a stationary bike, hooked up to the cart to be pretty, good as you could get with measuring VO2.
And so I would love to have whomever wants to grab this question. So the IAFF and International Fire Chiefs came up with the Wellness and Fitness Initiative. And within the Wellness and Fitness Initiative, there is a protocol, the Gherkin Protocol, which is, I would call a very sloppy at best estimate of a VO2 max. It's obviously better than not doing anything. But can you speak to sort of, I guess, not the accuracy of the Gherkin protocol, but the feasibility of even using it to measure an estimation of VO2 max? Like, are we wasting our time is the bottom line? Are we just wasting our time doing that test?
I don't think it's a waste of time. I hesitate to speak like you're saying on the accuracy and the validity of the Gherkin. I know I've seen it before. I just don't remember it off the top of my head. There's a couple of studies that will go off and compare multiple different VO2 estimation techniques, and I just don't recall exactly what the Gherkin was. So I don't want to be wrong. An estimation is better than nothing, but it's important to take into account how accurate it was. And what I like to recommend, and I'm not going to speak too much for Vanessa, but I believe this is the case. Many practitioners need to perform multiple assessments of aerobic capacity, especially if you're going to rely on more estimation rounds. Like I believe Vanessa does a couple of different aerobic capacity type tests, and not all of them are true aerobic capacity. I think she has a couple of more anaerobic capacity, which is measures of how well you can create energy without oxygen, right? So more short distance sprints, power activity, those sorts of things. Those are hallmarks of really outstanding strength and conditioning professionals who are trying to get a true holistic view of a person's athletic capability, which is needed for firefighting, because not everything is running a mile and not everything is running a 3 mile. Sometimes you're just carrying your hydraulic tools from your truck to the scene of MVC, and you're not going to see how well the firefighter is able to do that task with a VO2, rather you would be able to others. So come back to the question of, I think estimations are totally fine, but they should be a measurement that's among many others.
I think that's a fantastic answer. And I also want to just shout out Vanessa again. She's just doing such amazing work in Pflugerville. But I want to tell you what I say, and then you can either give me an A+ or rip it apart. Either is fine. What I tell my firefighters is this protocol that we're doing on the treadmill is a very rough estimation of your VO2 max. And I explain what that means. And I explain that NFPA says that we need 42 to be able to do structural firefighting safely. But then I also explain this protocol more than likely overestimates, based on the research, it overestimates your VO2 max. So even if you score a 42, you're probably not actually at a 42. So that's something that we need to work on. And then I say, we really want to compare how you are this year versus last year versus the year before. Kealey, did I get an A+?
I mean, I think so.
Okay. I'm not going to ask Dr. Mota because he'll probably give me a C- or something. So thank you, Kealey, for a really good grade.
Dad.
Thank you, Dad.
Good time.
All right. So before we leave that study, was there anything else that we should have hit on and talked about within that study, or are you ready to go on to the next one? Let me know.
There's one point we kind of touched on it that I think is interesting. Is Dr. Mota mentioned many firefighters in that study fell below the recommendation. We saw that like less than 18% of the firefighters in that sample were falling below that, even in like the fast group. So even those who were better performing on the test were still not meeting some of the recommendations, particularly with aerobic capacity, which is just interesting to consider. So they're still performing well, but maybe they're not meeting all the best kind of those health and performance metrics that they should be.
And now you sent me down a rabbit hole because because I had recently, it wasn't that recent anymore, probably November, I had a guest on from South Metro Fire, and he talked about the cardiac screening tests that they were doing. So they were taking some of their participants had screened out for needing assessments, but some of them were just completely, they volunteered. Like, I have no family history. I have no shortness of breath, no chest pain, no abnormal EKG. My calcium score is 0. Like, I have no reason to do this, but I'm just raising my hand and say that I'll do this. And it was a 64 slice CT scan of the heart. And within that small sample size, they found, I think, 2 people with very significant blockages of their left anterior descending artery, one of which would probably have been a full arrest within a few months, I think is what they told me. So that person that really didn't have any signs and symptoms had subclinical, I guess you would call it subclinical because there's no presentation. That scares the crap out of me. It scares the crap out of me. So how do we take that information and the information that your firefighters averaged a 34 on their VO2 max, and how do we scare the hell out of the fire service into getting more fit? What do you got? What ideas do you have?
I think it all starts with just like education and having the access. So trying to promote or disseminate this research of like, this is an issue, like you need to be aware of some of these things. And we're seeing more people have like these scans, like you're just mentioning, or like LifeScan, Frontline Mobile Health, some of these companies that are making this feasible for firefighters to have these kind of like whole body assessments of health and then find things out like this. So then like moving forward, they can be aware of maybe with their own health or with people within their department, their station, and then just kind of having enough information to make decisions for other people moving forward.
So it basically all comes back to education. I think you're right. It always does. But we have to keep educating because firefighters don't listen. Have you guys learned that yet? Firefighters don't listen.
As a previous firefighter, that never seems to go away for me. I still refuse to listen. Ask my wife. The one thing I'd add to that is, if you do the quick math of, with the NFPA recommends 42 mils per right now, that may change in the future. We saw 34 mils per. That's meaning that in order for the firefighters who are having the average of 34 mils per for your aerobic capacity to do the 42 milliliters per kilogram body mass aerobic capacity, you're working at about 120% of your max. So that's like looking for you pump engine operators out there. That's like watching your pumps, watching your RPMs, and hitting 20% above your red line. You wouldn't do that on a fire scene. You wouldn't do that to your personal vehicle. But why are we doing that to our hearts? And that should be the part that scares us, is when we have these low VO2 maxes, and for our job, we are working at 120% of our max. We're just asking for trouble from our cardiovascular system.
That is the best damn analogy I have ever heard. Oh my God, it's so good. Okay. All right. Now we're going to get to the part of the show where Annette didn't get a chance to read the paper because she has senioritis. But we are going to talk about your publication, Characteristics of Slow and fast performers on a firefighter air consumption test. Now, first things first, tell the listeners what an air consumption test is and how you set yours up.
So an air consumption test is often used to look at physical abilities with job-related tasks, particularly when you're on air with the SCBA. So if you're kind of familiar with the CPAT or the Candidate Physical Abilities test, a lot of the same tasks were used in this air consumption test, but again, just being on air with the SCBA in full bunker gear as compared to some of the other tests where you're just in normal clothes or exercise clothes. So for this test, it was 10 tasks for the air consumption test. Hose carry, ladder carries, hose drag, a couple ladder climbs, a sled pull, victim rescue. So a lot of those simulated occupational tasks that you would do in a scene of a fire or responding to an emergency. So for the goal for this was to just complete that as quickly as possible. And then we were trying to see if there were relationships between body composition, aerobic capacity, depending on how fast or slow they completed those 10 tasks, and then how much air they consumed from their bottle during the ACT or air consumption test.
Okay, let me guess. The firefighters that had lower aerobic capacity and or poorer body composition were slower on the test. How'd I do?
Gold star.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh my goodness, I didn't even have to read the paper. But here's the thing. I used to do it every Monday. I'm very irregular now, but I do my sort of a synopsis of a paper, and it's always the same conclusion. If you're fatter or you have poor aerobic capacity, you don't perform as well. So, that said, I want to know, can you, because I do very poorly explaining this to people, and so I need help. Okay, you're basically doing my homework for me right now. Why do some people go through their air supply so much more quickly? Let's say, even if they are relatively fit. So you're relatively fit, but you still burn through your air supply faster. What's the explanation for that? Or do you have one? Because I'm one of those people.
While Kealey comes up with an explanation, I'm gonna go off on a small little tangent.
Please do.
Kealey knows exactly where this is going. This going back to where we first started this this talk. You know how you mentioned, well, Kealey, you didn't say fitness. Do you remember that?
Yes.
That's my training on Kealey. I hate the use of the term fitness.
Oh, tell me more.
So your comment was right on. It's well, what if you got someone who's relatively fit? Well, my question is, what is fit? Is it strong? Is it lean? Is it muscular? Is it someone who runs a marathon? What does that mean? Because each of those are completely different physiological concepts. I don't know if you would look at me and say, "Oh, Jake, you're fit." You might say you're strong because all I do is go to my garage gym and lift weights for no more than 5 repetitions per set. But I'm not necessarily lean, and I do not run marathons. So it gets in this weird diatribe of what becomes fitness and what does that really mean. And as a scientist, I try to be very careful on our terms because that has direct implications for how they're used. And this is a great example of why I get hesitant around those terms, because you're exactly right. Someone may be fit, which I know what you mean, but they may or may not be draining that bottle whenever they get to a fire scene or whenever they're doing an air consumption test. So I like being super careful and clear with the terms for this reason. And that maybe gives you the background on Kealey's answer before.
Dr. Mota just took me to school. Okay, Kealey, you're up.
Oh, geez. Well, I think in the paper, going off what Dr. Mota said too, is that there's a lot of variables that influence fitness. So how someone's going to deplete their air, well, maybe like we saw in this paper, they just went through it quicker. So if you're moving through all the tasks, you're probably consuming more air. maybe they are just like running more, so the aerobic capacity is greater and they're consuming more air. So I think that's a limitation of the study, and we talk about it a little bit in the paper, but just so many variables play a role in how much oxygen you're probably consuming during something like these 10 tasks of the ACT.
I like that you said that because I'm sure I've gone off on this on my podcast on another episode, but I used to get so frustrated. We call it our consumption course, and it is supposed to be set up the same every year, and it's supposed to be measured between activities, but it's not. People just throw it together. And then, oh, oopsie, the mallet for the Kaiser sled broke. So we'll just hit the tire 20 times with the sledgehammer that weighs far, And so we go through these motions and we check these boxes, but we can't even compare our performance from one year to the next. And then the most frustrating thing is I have always said, is it better to get more rounds? Because we just go till we run out of air. Is it better to get more rounds or to go longer on the test? And no one can answer the question. So from your research and potentially the research that came out of Dr. Jacob's lab on his air consumption course, is there a way that we can sort of standardize these air consumption courses so we can tell someone this is how you should aim to perform? Is it possible or is it just not possible?
I think that's an academic question, and the answer it depends.
I love you.
But I think it's really hard to standardize tests. Like, I mean, as you know, you mentioned your consumption drill. This is just one. There's a lot out there that are different, even in each year. Like you mentioned, they're different in the same department. So I think the first goal maybe is just like some regulation or recommendation of a standardized assessment, more of like you see with a lot of standardized CPATs tend to have some of the same, which granted there's some issues there too, but something starting with the standardization of the ACT and then trying to standardize scoring or what you should be looking at for performance metrics from the ACT.
Is that something that you're thinking about working on? Asking for a friend?
Maybe.
Maybe.
The hard part about consumption testing for looking at every department in the US is there are so many unique needs that every department has. You may run into a very small department in Kansas that has tons of land and tons of space, right? And they can do pretty much anything they want to. And then you may go into a department in the middle of Los Angeles and they don't have any space. They don't have any run around. They don't have a parking lot. I'm kind of, making up an example here, but you get into these situations where it's hard to really standardize a good one. I think the best thing a department can do is to make a decision and stick to it and not bounce. If you bounce, then you're wasting everyone's time, including the administration's time by compiling the results. You're wasting the firefighters' time. Because the idea with these things is you want to be able to track things year over year or even in shorter time domains. But if you just change it up every year, well, it gets a little difficult.
We're just checking a box. Well, and I just thought of this. Dang, we had the most outdated air packs. I mean, they were the same ones that New York had for years. They were wire harness. They were so light. And we had 30-minute bottles. I did not know how good I had life back then. We got brand new Scott air packs a couple years ago. They weigh 11 billion pounds. Okay, they're a 45-minute bottle. And I just dread having to put that on. So I guess even an air pack would play into it, right? More weight, more work.
Yes, it's a weird conundrum because the VO2 component has a part of the equation called your body mass, but it's really built around someone wearing just athletic clothing when they go off for a run. A firefighter's body mass while they're performing the task, when they're wearing an air pack, when they're wearing when they're wearing their bunker gear, when they have tools on them, when they have tools in their pockets, that can add a substantial amount to someone's frame, which only makes that aerobic capacity value go down on the job. Which further makes it a bit more difficult to obtain the numbers you want to. And so, you may add a larger bottle and thinking, well, I'm just going to go from a 30-minute cylinder to a 45-minute cylinder so my guys and gals can go longer. And that logic is good. That makes sense, but it's heavier. And that increased mass is harder for you to move around. So it doesn't actually come out to that much of a savings for the firefighter.
Yeah, I'm super unhappy when I have to put that bottle on. It's horrible. All right. I want to ask you, first of all, I want to be respectful of your time. So I want to move on to future directions for the dad and Dr. Mota lab. Where are you guys looking to go from here?
Well, we've recently been working with police recruits. So
No, say it's not true.
gears a little. Well, still working with firefighters too, but branching out other first responder populations. But working with or taking kind of what we've done with previous work with fire recruits and looking at police recruit academies, looking at changes in police performance and health as they transition out of the academy into the incumbent roles. We're also still working with fire with the study with Kinsey, who you met, one of our master students. So looking at fatigue and how that affects job performance on specific tasks like the stair climb and variables involved in that, like muscular strength, power. So still kind of working in our tactical groups, but branching out into police a little more than fire.
And I gave you the business, but honestly, Dr. Dawes was quite clear. I may have to do a little work in police too, because sometimes the fire research kind of dries up around there. So, but I feel like I can be quite influential in recruiting subjects. Look into my eyes. You will do the study. Okay, well, that sounds super exciting, and I think it's awesome that you're branching out. Are there any rabbit holes we should have gone down that I didn't go down, Kealey?
Oh, geez.
Or Dr. Mota, either one of you?
There's 1,000 rabbit holes. You just kind of have to pick one, and I like my fair share of rabbit holes. One thing that we're probably going to go into in the very near future for a particular PhD candidate's dissertation, we're going to really try and push sports science to have a big home within both tactical populations, both the law enforcement side and the fire side. We really are going to start to take a stab next on how do we introduce wearables? How do we understand the physiological work that people perform on these jobs? And then try to understand what can we do better to prepare these individuals for that physiological work with the wearable data that we're going to try and gather from them.
I love it. And it also sounds like, Kealey, we're going to have to get you on 7-Minute Science next time. You can present some of your data on the wearables. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
All right. Kealey, do you have a dog?
Yes.
Okay, I need you to tell me all of the information about your dog.
Oh, gosh. So she's a black lab. Her name is Poppy.
Aw.
She's 3. She'll be 4 in a month, actually. She loves the dry Texas grass. She likes to roll around in the grass, so that's what we did like 30 minutes before on our walk before this talk. He's great. I love dogs. So.
I do too, and I'm like, I stalk them from a distance, so feel free to send me pictures. And Jake, since the last time I interviewed you, it was a group interview with Vince. I don't think we talked about dogs. Do you have a dog?
I don't think we talked about dogs either. And yes, I do have a dog.
Tell me more.
She is, her name's Hope. She will be 13 this fall. She is about 15 pounds, a little fluff ball. And that's our 4-legged friend of the family.
15 pounds of fluff. I love it. And since you didn't ask, but I'll tell you anyway. No, I don't have a dog. And I'm not sure if I'm going to get one, but J Dawes has dogs, so I'll probably go out and play with his dogs at least once in a while. So there we have it. Well, my lab friends, it has been a big pleasure and such an honor to talk to you. I appreciate you both. And I think, Kealey, should we drop the mic?
Sure.
Okay. So, Kealey and Dr. Mota and AZ, not Dr. AZ yet, and AZ are officially out. We're dropping the mic. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.